Morning, we're learning as a schus for Shlema, Filan Chai Basarach, and for Meir Ben Cyril Perel. We are on Daf Nun Aleph Amid Aleph in the middle of the Amid by the two dots. Moving on to a new treifa that we had mentioned in the Mishnah, which was Naflim and Agag, an animal that fell off a roof, suffered a fall. So we're worried that when it falls down, all its bones get loosened, and it could make it into a treifa, something that will inevitably kill the animal. Sagt die Gemara, Amar Rav Huna, hiniach behema lamaylo, ubo matz lamata, ein choshen min mishuke evar. If you left an animal that it was on top of a roof, and then later on you come and you find it on bottom, you don't have to worry that this fall caused it to become a treifa. As we're going to see, an animal that it's only an animal that falls. It doesn't realize, it steps over the edge without realizing it. So animals are, cats have 9 lives. If an animal knows what it's doing, we're going to see it's shaila. Either it stops itself along the way, or else it only jumps when it knows it can handle it. So as long as it's doing it on its own, we don't worry about it becoming a treifa from going down. It's only when it falls. Who gadya the havale l'Ravina? Ravina had a young kid, a young goat. The chazah chushla be'impuma. It saw through a skylight. It saw some yummy food, some fodder. Dagar nafal me'igr l'ara. I'm sorry, the gar I think is from the roof. Nafal me'igr l'ara, and it fell through the skylight to the ground. Dagar nafal me'igr, I think it means it jumped and it fell down to get that food. Asal kamei de Rashi, came to Rashi to ask what's the halacha. That which we said, that if you left it on top and you find it on bottom, then we're not worried about it becoming treifa. That we don't worry that it broke its bones or it shattered. It made its bones fall out of their sockets. Is it only because we're talking about a normal case where it's on top and it was found on bottom, that the animal scrabbled, along the wall as it fell down, and it broke its fall, so we're not worried about it. But this over here, because it comes from a skylight, there's nothing for it to hold itself on with, and therefore, even though the animal did it intentionally, maybe we do have to be chaysher treifa. Or is it because the animal, when it goes intentionally, it evaluates on its own that it can make the jump, and the animal has a natural ability to gauge whether it's able to do something. V'hai nami nafsha, and this one also jumped. If it jumped, it didn't hurt. It knew it wasn't going to hurt himself. So, what is the reason why, where an animal goes intentionally, it's saved from becoming a treifa? Depending on which explanation, that will determine whether this animal is a treifa. He says the reason when it goes intentionally down a cliff, it's because the animal evaluates that it can do it so safely. And this one that went through the skylight also, it did it safely. It's not a treifa. There was a youth, a female sheep that Rav Chaviva had. To have a shadran kari basraisa. She was dragging her leg behind her. Rav Yemer, Haishi gruna nakte. He said, don't worry about it. This doesn't mean she's a treifa. It's not a broken leg, which would make her a treifa. It's just a cramp, a muscle cramp, but it will go away, and it's not a treifa. Masko Ravina, how do you know for sure it's just a cramp? Maybe it's a broken spine, and that's what's causing its leg to drag, and that would make it a treifa. But Kua, they checked it. Ashkachua Ravina. They found Ravina's suggestion, his worry that maybe it was a broken spine, was correct. But even so, the halacha is if we see an animal dragging, we don't have to suspect it's a treifa. So I would imagine if you don't have the opportunity to check afterwards, you can assume that it's just a cramp but not a broken spine. As the Gemara explains, shagruna shchiach chut hashedra lo shchiach. Cramps are common. A broken spine is not so common. The more likely explanation is the cramp. Amar Rav Huna, Scharim hamenachem zeh. Before we talk about female sheep, now we're talking about the male sheep. So the male sheep like to butt heads. It's a famous thing that rams do. That's why they're called rams, and that's why we call it to ram into something, because that's what rams do. They butt into each other. We're not concerned that the impact is like falling. Avagav the midvi v'kaimi, even though you could see that after they butt heads, the rams are in pain. It's only a little bit of fever, but it's not a resike evarim. It's not a problem that the evarim got shaken loose. But but if the ram after butting heads falls to the ground, then we have to be chayish that it caused resuke evarim and it's a trait. Amar Rav Menashe, Hani Dichri the Ganvi Ganavi, these kids, these young sheep that were stolen by robbers, even though when they're stolen, they have to toss them over the fence. We're not concerned that the sheep are damaged in their tracks. My time, and what's the reason? The robbers are careful when they throw them over the fence to make sure they land upright, they land on their feet. In order that after the robbers themselves jump over the fence, the sheep will be able to run away with them. If they break them, they're going to be stuck. They can carry all their sheep that they're stealing. So therefore, we don't have to be chayish that they became treifas from being thrown over. Ahadrinu, but if the robbers return the animals, then on the way back, when they throw them back over the fence, if they change their mind and decide not to take them, then we have to say they become treifas. That's only if the robbers got caught in the act and they have regret. They don't want to get caught. They see people coming, so they quickly throw the sheep back over the fence and they say, "Oh, we're just hanging around. We weren't stealing anything." So when they throw it back over the fence, they don't really care what happens to the sheep. But if the robber throws it over the fence and he says, I have, because he was about to steal, and he realized it's not what he wants to do with his life, and he does tshuva ma'al yisudabdi, then we assume that he's wanting to do the right thing, and, if you throw over the person's sheep and break it, you really mechayev to pay for it. So since they're not offering to pay for it, we assume that they did it carefully, and he didn't become a treif. Amar Rav Amarav, Hikal Roisha, if you hit a animal with a stick on its head, let's say the bottom of the stick hit its head, and the top of the stick, the point of the stick, hit its tail. Or vice versa. You hit it on its tail, and then the tip of the stick hit it on its head. Or connected kula, or if you did it along the whole length of the animal. The whole thing, it's spread out. Whatever it hit the spine was spread out. We don't say it's a treifa. We don't think that the hit broke its spine. The shalom chutra apalge the gava, and if the stick that you're hitting it with doesn't reach all the way to the end, so it's not hitting the whole spine at the same time. It only reaches half. So it's more of an impact on the parts that it hits. Cheshin. Then we say it's a treifa. The yisbe kitri, if there are knots or bumps on the stick, cheshin. Then we say that the stick might have hit it on the spine and broken a part of the spine of the animal. It becomes a treifa. The imachia apaske, and if he hit it instead of hitting the animal lengthwise, he hits it widthwise on its back, then cheshin, and again we say it could have broken the spine and we're chayish. If it's not spread out like the first case, or it skips over the spine, then we have to be chayish for risuke evar. Omar Nachman, Beis harachan ein mishum risuke evar. Beis harachan is the womb when the animal is birthed, the birth canal. We don't have to worry about that it's going to cause the animal to be a treifa when the animal is born. We don't assume that that could cause to be a treifa. Taisus asks the obvious question. Beis harachan ein mishum risuke evar, mishum the ikar the eina halach. It's rechel shmina. It's talking about a case where the animals normally walk immediately when they're born. We're talking about an animal that wasn't able to walk afterwards. Certainly, most animals are not, when they're born, we don't say they become a treifa. It doesn't make any sense. Most animals that are born survive. So the case that we're worried about is where the animal was born and didn't stand up. As we're going to see later on, this whole din that we're talking about, that if it falls, we have to assume it's a treifa. First of all, that's only if it doesn't survive 24 hours. Once it survives 24 hours, then we can dispense with the idea that it's reisuke avarim, that it's a treifa. But secondly, it's also where the animal doesn't stand up, or if it stands up, it doesn't walk. But if it stands up, that shows that it's not the case. So over here, we're talking about a case where the animal didn't stand up, which it normally would do. So that's why we're concerned about Risuke Evar. Amalei Ravler of Nachman. This is Rav Nachman Shita. Doesn't have, it's not a concern. Tanya B'sayei Aloch, I'll bring you a raya from a Bryce. Tinik ben Yom Echad, Betama Beziva. A man can be Metama when he has this emission of a certain kind of zera that is unusual, that makes a very chamadika type of tumah. And we're saying that could apply even to a baby, a human baby, a child, a man who's born when he's only 1 day old, even less than a day old. If you'll say that there is such a concept that the birth causes trauma that can make someone into a treifa, potentially, the rule is that the din of ziva only applies when the person does not have some kind of outside external factor that could have caused the emission. But if he has some kind of something happens to him, let's say he's sick, there are a number of things, but obviously Risuke Varm, something that would make him into a treifa, would be considered an external condition that caused the zava, caused the emission. So from the fact that we don't say that there's Risuke Evarim that causes him to emit, that this would be an actual ziva, vice versa, we're not concerned of Risuke Evarim on a newborn. Now, obviously, a newborn human being never stands up. But the Gemara Taisus says in Aman Aleph that this is only in the case, I mean, if there is such a concept of Risuke Evarim, even though we wouldn't say that every child born that every baby born is a treifa, that's going to die eventually from the Risuke Evarim. But because it's not going to stand anyway to show, but if there is such a thing of Risuke Evarim, that you only need a relatively low level of disturbance to take away the din of a zav. So that it wouldn't make sense that it should become a zav, if there is such a thing as Risuke Evarim. And for the Gemara, no, that's not a raya. The only case, there would be Risuke Evarim. But over here, the reason why there's no Risuke Evarim is because the animal was born by cesarean section, so it didn't have the trauma of being born through the narrow birth canal. Tashma, Egel Shenelo b'Yomtiv, Sheikh L'Neiseh b'Yomtiv, a calf that was born on Yomtiv. Now, there's a halacha that you can't use something that wasn't prepared at the beginning of Yomtiv. It's Neilet, something that came into being, but an Egel that was born on Yomtiv, before it was born, if you shechted the mother together with the calf, it would certainly be kosher. because you're allowed to eat with its shchita, so it is prepared. Um, so therefore, if it's born on Yom Tov, you could eat it on Yom Tov. You could shecht it. It's not considered that it wasn't muchan before Yom Tov. So, but why don't we have a concern that that you can shecht an animal even without waiting 24 hours to see whether has Risuke Avarim? The Gemara Hakanami can shiyotza derech toifim. Maybe this din that we said in the Mishnah that an egel that's not on Yom Tov can be shechted. It's only talking about where it had we want to do it on that same day, right? It's being shechted on Yom Tov, so you don't wait to see if it's a treifa. It's talking about only where it was born by cesarean section. Tashma. I mean, I'm just thinking, is it mutter to do a cesarean section on a animal on Yom Tov? Right? You're eating the calf, but you're not. I guess that's called tzarech Yom Tov, right? Because you want to eat the calf, even though I guess it would. I don't know. I don't know. It's all right. You're not allowed to cut an animal, not the tzarech eichel nefesh. I guess it's tzarech eichel nefesh of the calf, even though it's not for the mother. Tashma v'shaven she'im noiled hu umuma imay. We're talking over here about a bechar. Of the din of a bechar is that it has to be brought as a carbon. But if it has a mum, then it doesn't have to be brought as a carbon. You could just shecht it and eat it. So we have a question over here. There's a machlokes. Legabi, under what circumstances if you have a bechar that got a mum on Yom Tov, are you allowed to eat it? Because before Yom Tov, it wasn't ready to be shechted, because it has to be. It wasn't in the Beis Hamikdash. You couldn't bring it as a carbon, and it first became roy. It first became muchan noiled that it's able to be eaten when it got the mum. So he says. So one man says it's muksa and you can't eat it, and one man says not. But they both agree that if the bechar is born and it already has a mum, it's born with a mum, shezem and amuchan, you could have eaten it right away. And if you're saying over here, it's talking about where it came out with a cesarean, so it didn't have the trauma, that's why it could be eaten on that day. Derech doifen mikadosh. Derech doifen would never have been. It would not have been able to be brought as a carbon anyway, because it would have lost its. There's a din that you can't bring a carbon as kosher if it came from a cesarean section, and I mean, Taisus points out that you really could have asked a better question, that if it was born by cesarean section, it's not a bechar anymore. A bechar is only an animal with a natural birth. Cesarean section precludes it from being kachim. Rav Yochanan moida higher Rav Shimon l'inyan kachim she'enit kaddish. That Rabbi Yochanan already said Rav Shimon is moida that legabi kachim that doesn't become kaddish. There's another way that the animal can demonstrate, and when it digs in its legs, even though it didn't stand up, but if it digs in its legs to try to get it to stand up, that's an indication of life. And even though maybe it would have been potentially risuk evarim, it's not a raya because this is talking about where it showed its intention to try to stand. Amr of Nachman. Beis hamitvachim ein by mishum risuke evarim. When the sheichet they would turn the animal upside down and throw it on the ground in order to shecht it. That throwing on the ground does not cause it to become a trait. There was an animal that was thrown down, and they heard it that it was kvetching. It was making noises. All Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa shacham shufri. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marsa went and ate from the best parts of that cow. He said it's not a problem of treifa. Amalei Rabban min alacha. He said, how do you know it's not a treifa? Amalei haki amar of Rav. Sifan of Shloyev ad shemegia la'aretz. When an animal is being put for shchita, it's resisting. It knows what its fate is, and it resists by digging its legs into the ground. So even though it falls on the ground, it's like the animal that scrabbles down the cliff. If it's resisting the fall, that saves it from becoming a treifa. So this is also not a right. Amr Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Omda ena tzricha me'es le'es. Ena tzricha me'es le'es. So the general rule is, right, an animal that we are chayish for treifa, we have to wait 24 hours for me'es le'es. If it survives 24 hours, then we're no longer worried that it has risuke evar. So he's saying if it stands up, then you don't have to wait the 24 hours. It's immediately you get rid of the chash of it becoming a treifa. But bedika vade boy, you still have to check its spine, and we'll see exactly what you have to check to make sure that it didn't become a treifa. Halcha, but once it walks, if it didn't just stand up, but it walks, ain't a tricha bedika. You don't even need a bedika after the shchita. Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar, Rav Chia bar Ashi disagrees. Achazu b'achazu tricha bedika. It's not just if it stood up, even if it walked, you still need to check if you have to check if it became a treif. Amar Yivarach Amar Rav, Pashtu Yada Lamed, Afal Pishaloi Amda. If it stuck out its forelegs in order to stand up, even though it didn't stand up, or akra ragal halach, or if it picked up its leg, it was standing. And now the question is going in Rav that he's machalik. He says the difference between if it just stood up, then you need to check it. But if it walked, then it doesn't need to be checked. So if it was standing up and it moved its leg in order to walk, even though it didn't move, that's enough to take off the chash of treifa, of risuke evarim, and therefore you can eat it without waiting meisles.
So we're talking about the animal actually walked after shchita?
No. If after it fell.
After it fell.
We're talking about after it fell. After it falls, if we're chayish that it has risuke evarim, then you have to wait 24 hours to see if it survives, if it's okay. But we're saying there's a shortcut to waiting those 24 hours. If it stood up, you don't have to wait the 24 hours. But according to Rav, if it stood up, then you still have to check it after the shchita. But according to the other mandama, you don't have to even if it just stood up, even without walking, you have to check it in either case. So we're saying what kind of walking does it have to do according to Rav? So he says, first of all, standing could be, it doesn't have to be it actually stands. If it tried to stand up, or akaragla, I guess it was standing and it picked up its leg, and then you don't even need a bedika afterwards. Rav Chizda said it doesn't have to be that it picked up its leg to stand, even if it just moves its leg, that's enough. It shows it's not paralyzed. That's enough to say that it doesn't have a spinal problem. So some people have this next gear, some don't. It's going to be only possible where it doesn't know, but if it knows that it's falling, then it's not a treifa. If it stood up and it didn't go like Rav, then it needs bedika. But you don't have to wait 24 hours. And if it moved, then it doesn't even need a bedika. This that we said, an animal that fell needs a bedika. It needs to be checked by its stomach area. He says it doesn't just need opposite the stomach. I'm not sure. Yeah, I would think it also means the spine, but I guess it means the whole skeleton. So he says you need also to check the intestines, the digestive system. But this other man, Amar Papa, says you have to check the entire torso, the chest as well as the stomach. Amle Hunamar Bar Breder of Nehemiah, the Rab, Ashi. Simonimai. What about by the Veshet and the Kana? Do you have to do a Badik on that? Amalei, Simonim Koshin and Eitzel Nefil. You don't have to check the Simonim because they're hard and they wouldn't get broken. Amar Yudam Shmuel. Now I'm going to start a whole very detailed examination. It's I guess birds. We're talking about birds that fall in different ways. I guess birds are often falling, so they easily could become they're flying in the sky, so they have more opportunities to fall. So the Gemara has a lot of different details of how and what under what circumstances an eif's falling makes it in the treifa. So a bird that fell into the water, as long as it is able to swim its own length, the bird swims its own length, that shows that it's not risuk evarim, it's not a treif. That's only if it's swimming against the tide or against the current. But if it's just going with the current, it's being carried. That's not an indication that it's not a treifa. B'maya kaimi, if it's at a spot where the current gathers into a pool, less lumba. That's not going to be a raya. That's still going to be a raya if it swims, even though it's still going with the current. But since it's slowed down, it's not. So we don't say the current carried it. But even if it's going in the current, if it goes faster than the current, that shows that the bird is not a treif. Glima masis, if it hits a stretched out piece of cloth, the bird bangs into it, chayshinan. We're chayish that the bang caused it to become a treifa. Deloy matiach loy chayshin. But if it's not stretched out, then it's we're not chayish. Oif u'ma'ofaf, if the cloth that's stretched out is folded over, loy chayshinan, because that softer cushions the blow. Isla umakarvi kitri. If you have a net that catches a bird and it has close knots in it, chayshinan. We're chayish that the hard knots were made in a treifa. Mikravi kitri loy chayshinan. Loy mikravi kitri loy chayshinan. If the bird knots are separated, we're not chayish. Kissen David betuni. If you took, I think flax. Was Kisna? Kisna Vituni? Yeah, Pishtan. Asi Chavilas Chavilas. You made bundles of flax. You are chayish that if it lands on it, it makes it into a treifa. The high geese alechashin. But if it hits the sides of the flax, we say that it can grab down as it's going, and it's not as hard a bang. This will become a treifa. Asuraisa. If Rashi says on a bunch of konim, he fell on a bundle of konim, of reeds, with chayish that makes it into treifa. Kisna, the daik v'nofetz, if you have flax that was, they used to beat the flax to take out the hard pieces from it, v'nofetz, and then they would comb it, so it was fully processed. So flax itself is soft, loy chayshina, and if it falls on it, it's not a treifa. Daik v'loy nofetz, they beat it, but they didn't comb out the pieces. Chayshinin, that is enough, that it's hard enough that we're worried about the hard pieces are still in there. The Ovid Bizri, if they made it into a bundle, since they bundle it with knots, we're worried that it hit the knot and it makes it into a treifa. Daksa chayshinan, daktakasa loy chayshinan. If you take this different parts that you take out of the flax when you beat it and comb it. If you take out the hard parts, the pieces of the hard pieces of the flax, before you make it into linen, and it lands on those hard pieces, yechayish. Dr. Kasa is the little pieces of flax that are too small. When you comb it out, you take out the small pieces, you leave behind the long fibers, but those are still soft. If the bird lands on it, it's not a treifa. Nivra, Navra is the fibers that come from a palm tree. So if they fell on those unprocessed palm fibers, those are hard, so chayish for treifa. Timchasa, but once it was made into a string, it was made into fibers that could be used as rope. So those are softer, so we're not chayish for treifa. Kitman nehale, I'm sorry, kitman nehila. If you have you take the ash from a fire and you sift it. I think they used it to make cement, so that makes it hard. Chayshinan, it makes it into treifa loy nehila. But if it wasn't sifted, so it remains soft ash. If it falls in that, it's not a treifa. Chayil hadak, fine sand loy chayshinan. It doesn't make into a treifa. Chayil hagas, but coarse sand chayshinan. It make we're chayish for treifa if a bird falls in. Avak drachim, dust from the road falls onto the road. Chayshinan, it's hard packed from people walking on it. Tivna va'avid bizga, if it fell onto hay that was bundled together, chayshinan, it makes it hard. Lo yavid bizaga, if it's not bundled, lo chayshinan. We're not chayish for the hay. Chiti v'chol deminayu chayshinan, anything that's hard like wheat. Any kernel that's hard like wheat, where if a bird falls on it, it's treifa, sha'ari b'chol deminayu, or I guess you wait until you have to wait 24 hours. Sa'ari, but barley, which is softer, and anything similar to it, chayshinam, I think we changed that to loy chayshinam. Yeah. The Messiah Sas changed it to loy chayshinam. Kol mini kitnius, ein bahem mishum misuke evarim, all kinds of beans, legumes, are not chayish for treifa. Levar min ruvia, except for ruvia, a specific kind of legume. Chimtzi, ein by mishum risuk evarim. I think chimtzi is chickpeas. They're softer and there's no chash of treifa. Chetzi, but I'm sorry, chimtzi is peas, chefzi is chickpeas. So those are harder kinds of peas that you do after yesh mishum risuk evarim. Called the milsa, called the masik, anything that the animal could slip off of. It's not just softer or harder, but anything has a like a rounded side that it could slip off of. Loy mishaki, it doesn't cause it to become a treifa. I'm sorry. The call me the mishaki, we don't worry that it breaks. Loy mishak, if it's not rounded, we're concerned that it will cause it to become a treifa. Davak, Ravashi, sorry, if the animal falls it could get caught on a glue trap and then falls because after it got glued. Ravashi, sorry, Amei Marasa. Ravashi says it's mutter, Amei says asa. B'chad gaba the glue yamilei pligi. If they only got the glue that stopped one wing from working, lei pligi the shari, everyone will give it's mutter because even though it fell down, it has its other wing to soften the fall. Keep pligi betray gabi. But it's only when both wings got glued that it can't flap at all. Then manda asa amalach heichi nekim. The other one says, how can it help itself? Manda shari amalach efshe the nekim aikvi de gapi. Even though the wing tips have glue on them, and he can't use the wing tips, but it can move the bottom of its wings, the main trunk of the wing, and that softens the fall a little bit. If it's both wings, everyone agrees it's us because it really can't flap. They only argue on one. It can flap, it can fly a little bit with one wing. It needs two wings to fly, one wing is useless. Sorry, the din is two wings that glued, if it falls, it becomes a treifa. But we have to worry and wait 24 hours. But chad gapa, but one wing, it's mutter. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Yasher kayach, and I'll see you from later.